Obsidian Gorge is not your typical national park. People find their way here for reasons they can't quite name. The staff, the visitors, the wanderers. They show up without a clear destination in mind. And after they leave, the memory of the place slips from their minds like water through fingers. Here, you can find trees with veins that pulse, creatures in the air that defy classification, entryways that are better left unopened. And no one truly understands why. There are speculations, naturally, conjectures and notions discussed in hushed tones behind closed doors. In the end, that's all they are, speculations. I found Holly's phone, my colleague who'd supposedly resigned, wedged between the cushions of my living room sofa. Something was off. She'd vanished without a word, but what if she'd never actually left at all? I needed to tell Wren or Eleanor. That seemed clear. But which one was less terrifying to approach? That part was murkier. I decided on Eleanor. Just as I raised my hand to knock, I second-guessed myself and turned toward Wren's cabin, then reconsidered and headed back to Eleanor's. Then, the door swung open abruptly. "For heaven's sakes, just knock already," Eleanor said. "Watching you dither back and forth through the window is unbearable." "Oh, right. Well, the thing is..." Her frown remained fixed. I held up the phone and tried a friendly smile. Her frown deepened. "This is Holly's phone. It turned up at my place. You said she'd quit, though." "She probably just forgot it." That was a reasonable assumption coming from Eleanor, a woman who spent most of her time deep in the wilderness, quietly contemplating the scrubland in self-imposed isolation. But for anyone living in the current era, if Holly had lost her phone, she'd have looked for it. She would have come by my place to check. "Did you actually see her leave? Drive away from the gorge?" "The chief told me." She gave a slight shrug. "Mentioned it yesterday." "Let me guess. Late at night with no one else around?" "How did you..." Her eyes didn't go wide. That would require more emotion than Eleanor possessed, but they did gain a certain focus. She'd certainly heard about my disastrous first night on lockup duty, my encounter with the imposter Wren. She understood. Without another word, Eleanor pushed past me and headed for the tree line. I hurried after her. "Where are we going?" "You're not." I could have gone home then, but I had the day off, and fishing suddenly seemed pointless after realizing Holly was missing, so I waited. About an hour after sunset, Eleanor returned. "Anything?" She barely looked at me. I followed her back to her cabin, aware I was being irritating and not particularly concerned. "So what now? Do we organize a search? Look for that pale structure?" "We hope she doesn't come back." Eleanor tried to close her door, but I got my foot in the way. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means your colleague is gone for good. Not just missing, gone. The best thing she can do now is stay away, and the best thing you can do is stop searching. It'll only be worse if she returns." "How do you know she's gone? You couldn't have covered the whole gorge." Eleanor rubbed a smudge of dirt from her cheek. Her already somber expression grew darker. "I didn't need to. I already located her." She refused to say anything else after that. To be fair, she did slam the heavy wooden door in my face and bolted. Conversing through solid oak would have been difficult anyway. Over the following days, I got the distinct impression she was dodging me, more than usual at least. There was no ill intent behind it. I'd long realized Eleanor wasn't as harsh as the other rangers made her out to be. It didn't feel like she was guarding some enormous secret. It was more that there were things she couldn't bear to describe, or more likely, she didn't think I could bear to hear them. I didn't want to let it go. If there'd been any avenue for me to investigate further, I'd have taken it, no matter how foolish. I knew that about myself. But there was truly nothing to do. The best I could come up with was wandering aimlessly through the backcountry, hoping to stumble across whatever remains Eleanor had surely already found. I tried to push it aside, to keep busy like before, immersing myself in Obsidian Gorge and its visitors. I tried to distract myself. About a week later, I no longer had to. The knocking came just as I was drifting off. I wasn't sure if it was real or the beginning of a dream. Then it came again. I pulled on a shirt and cap and opened the door. No one was there. I leaned out, looked both ways, and waited. When I finally closed the door, I didn't go back to bed. Instead, I lingered just inside the entrance. This wasn't some prankster. We were in the staff housing, far from any campground, and this was Obsidian Gorge. If something felt threatening, it probably was. Whatever knocked would be back. Sure enough, a few minutes later, the pounding resumed. I yanked the door open mid-knock to reveal nothing. A chill crawled from my toes to the nape of my neck. The third time the knocking came, I didn't bother opening. The fourth time, I thought about hiding under the bed like a frightened child. The fifth, I decided to make a run for it. There'd be no one at the door anyway, and Eleanor was only a short sprint away. Maybe she'd know what was happening. I steeled myself, prepared to dash, and threw the door open. There she was. Where I was certain nothing had stood before, a silhouette was framed against the trees. Holly. She was motionless, expression blank. She raised one finger, curled it for me to follow, then retreated into the forest. This is how it ends. That was my first thought. You follow her and you die. I knew how these stories went. You pursue the eerie figure and they turn out to be a killer. You wander off alone and something predator finds you. There was no doubt about it. Following Holly was a terrible, foolish idea. I should have gone to Eleanor. And yet, Eleanor would talk me out of it. That was also certain. I'd never get another chance. I would never know. The small flashlight clipped to my belt tapped against my thigh as I walked. I didn't turn it on. Holly was visible in the moonlight, always just ahead. Occasionally she'd vanish, leaving me to stumble forward blindly, but I always caught up. She never once looked back. High above, a ribbon of brilliant stars was visible over the canyon. Leaves and twigs crunched underfoot. I was violating every conservation principle I lectured visitors about during the day, trampling untouched vegetation, disturbing natural habitats. I didn't care. When I finally emerged from the trees, it was onto a flat, sandy clearing that ended at a steep cliff face. Holly didn't move as I approached. She sat cross-legged, staring straight ahead. Before her, set into the rough rock wall, was a door. Open. I waited. Nothing emerged from the impenetrable darkness beyond the threshold. Nothing entered. The door was a modern style, 3 symmetrical frosted panels set into a coat of white paint. It could have been a door from any suburban neighborhood or a display piece in a furniture store. How long I stood there, I couldn't say. An hour perhaps? The entire night? Eventually, Holly arose. She drifted into the open passage as if in a trance. It closed behind her. After that, she visited often. Sometimes it took several rounds of knocking before I stirred from sleep. Sometimes I answered after the first. Eventually, it became easier just to stay awake, curled against my bed frame, waiting for the summons. I never once resisted. It was always the same. I would follow Holly, or the thing that wore her face, through the woods. She would stare at the door for an indefinite period, and eventually she would leave, closing it behind her. Nothing tried to escape the passage. No pale structures with exploding windows. Night after night, I waited for something to shatter, something to fall. It never did. Nothing seemed to be after me. Aside from our ritual, nothing happened at all. The changes were so gradual that I barely registered them at first. Over days and weeks, Holly's hair darkened. Her blonde waves deepened to black, straightened and lengthened. Soon it fell past her knees, brushing the undergrowth as she walked. It would pool around her when she sat. Her mouth stretched. The corners pulled back across her jaw. Dark threads appeared stitching her lips together, tightening. Her eye sockets hollowed. Her eyes vanished entirely. She stared at the door with empty, blackened pits. Eleanor's words echoed in my mind. We hope she doesn't come back, and it'll be worse if she returns. She was right. Even then I knew it, but I couldn't stop. My need to understand had morphed into something beyond simple curiosity. Obsession, perhaps? Hunger? I dragged myself through my work, exhausted from sleepless nights. Caffeine stopped working. The line between reality and nightmare blurred. I could see what my nightly journeys were doing to me, but I couldn't bring myself to end them. They were draining me, consuming me. Eventually, someone else noticed. I told you to let her go. It was the first voice that had ever broken the silence during my visits to the door. Before me sat Holly, motionless as ever. I didn't bother turning to identify the speaker. "Care to join me?" "You shouldn't be here," Eleanor said. "I know. That's why I never told you." We stood in silence. How did she become like this? She followed the last person. Holly inhaled. Far away, a gust of wind rustled the trees, but it never reached us. Not even the wind dared approach the doors. "You have to let this go," Eleanor said. "I know, but I don't think I will." "Is this about her?" "I'm not naive. It's too late for Holly. Even her eyes are gone. If we were going to save her, we should have—" "Not Holly. Rachel." I drew a sharp breath. "How do you—" "We do background checks. Ren has me help. Basic things, criminal records and such. I searched for you before we hired you. There were plenty of articles about the accident. Your name came up. She was your fiancé." I didn't respond, but Eleanor kept talking. For once, she was the loquacious one. "You need answers about the doors because you never got closure about her. That's it, isn't it? She died, and this is your way of coping. If you can figure out what's happening in Obsidian, you can let go of what happened to Rachel." Holly stood. She approached the door and disappeared beyond it. It closed with the whisper of a latch. Eventually, Eleanor left. Eventually, I did too. She would appear occasionally after that. Not every night, but often enough that I no longer felt surprised when she took her place beside me. She never tried to drag me away or threatened to tell Ren. Most nights, Eleanor didn't even speak, but we both knew that her simple presence was a safeguard against me doing anything foolish. I was going to end it, I told her after a week.
There are doors on the sides of the canyon walls. You don't open those doors. You don't look at them too long. But twice a month, when the moon is cut perfectly in half, you go lock them. You do not ask why. "Ah, initiation," I said my first week. "I'm the new guy. You need some stupid ritual before I'm allowed in the club?" My chief ranger stared through me. Her face didn't move, not a muscle. I held up my hands. "Fine. Seriously, fine. I did a fraternity. I'll do whatever. Want me to watch these doors every night? Paint them with blood? Say the word." And they meant it. My position was seasonal. If they wanted murder, I'd murder. If it kept me here past summer, I'd do anything. Stay away from the doors, was all Chief told me. That was that. They weren't a joke. I learned that fast. The doors and the canyon walls were no joke, and neither was the park. The other rangers were polite enough, morning nods at employee housing. But Ebony Gorge itself, the actual park, the longer I worked there, the more it felt like the park was working on me. In the mornings, the birds were silent. From sunset until nightfall, they would sing. But otherwise, they would only watch from the trees. Their eyes followed, always followed. Visitors never came twice. In the reservation system, nobody had ever stayed more than once. None I spoke with mentioned the previous visit, not once. When they left quickly. Some looked pale, some wouldn't speak at all. Even the landscape ignored logic. Surrounding terrain was desert, steep mesa cliffs, sandstone hoodoos. Inside the gorge, lush green forest. No river, hardly any rain. Yet the foliage thrived, thick and hungry, leaves too green, branches reaching toward the trails like they knew you were there. Looking back, I should have been suspicious when I got the job. The National Park Service isn't the military. We aren't assigned anywhere. We apply like everyone else, and competition is brutal. You'd be surprised how many people dream of being underpaid and overworked in the middle of nowhere. I shouldn't have had a shot at this position, even seasonal. During university summers, I'd volunteered at a state park, but nothing special. I'd studied biology, worked in a nutrition lab for 3 years. Sure, I spent my free time backpacking, but when I applied to be a ranger at an unlisted national park, it was a whim, zero expectations. After one round of interviews, the job was mine. I was so desperate to escape my real life that I barely blinked when they told me the park was called Ebony Gorge, a park I'd never heard of, no mention anywhere online. And when I arrived and there were doors pressed into the canyon walls, I still didn't blink. That's what you do when you have one chance left. You don't flinch. You smile and look the other way, even when something behind you does not. Some doors had brass handles, some had hinges, some were wood, some metal, some were just the outline of a door painted on stone like ancient warnings. They had two things in common. They were all far from any public trail, and they were all firmly shut. I'd come to Ebony Gorge to hide. I was so relieved to be accepted that I could follow the rules. I could ignore the oddities. I refrained from questions about the purple pulsing veins on trees or who built the 10-foot-tall cairns deep in the backcountry, the ones that dripped with something dark and sticky that was definitely blood. I could stand ignoring the doors because staying here was worth the alternative of going home. Until it wasn't. Next time is your turn, Winona told me days before the next quarter moon, end of the week. Then a few days later, get lots of sleep, you'll need it. The day before my turn, she mentioned it twice, tomorrow, and later, be ready. By the end, I laughed at her concern. Winona was less talkative than a gravestone, and here she was, fretting about my sleep schedule. Don't worry, Winnie, I'll remember, swear, on, hang on, what was your religion again? I swear on whoever that was. Reassuring? It's Winona. Her expressionless face turned downward. Better yet, Chief. Right. Despite my confidence, I was caught unaware when she shook me awake in the dead of night. I overslept. Coming. At least that's what I tried to say. It came out mostly as grunts. I followed her to the ranger station, locked my radio on my belt, grabbed a set of bone-white keys from the wall hook. By then I was more awake. Shouldn't I have a partner? Not tonight. He can't make it. Eastside Ranger already left. Call this your initiation. I see what you did there. Go quick. Lock them all by sunrise. If it gets light before you finish, stop immediately. That's not the preferred outcome, but they should already be locked. Absolutely no touching the doors themselves. You remember which way to turn the key? Right to lock. Left to lock. Have you been listening at all? Sorry. What are you waiting for? You're late enough. Sorry. But even as I stumbled toward a door, frantic to please, there was one more thing. You said they should all be locked already. And if one isn't? Her face did something I'd never seen before. Something that might have been fear. They will be. She paused. But if one isn't, you run. You run fast. Or you don't. It's really the same either way. What did that mean? I'm not sure Now go. Sorry. I went. The night was impossibly dark. That sounds silly, but there's a difference between suburban darkness and the darkness of a designated dark sky park. This darkness pressed against my eyes. My light shone red on ridged tree trunks as twigs and leaves crunched underfoot. The sounds were too loud. The silence between them was worse. I reached the first door quickly, cedar frame with gold trimming. I stared at it. We weren't supposed to look at them directly, but tonight was different. The longer I stared, the harder it was to tell if the door really existed. Perhaps it was a crinkle in reality, a wound in the universe that had scarred over. Even after months at Ebony Gorge, I'd never shaken the feeling of eyes on my neck. It didn't matter how many solo hikes. They watched from the trees, the sky, the ground, day and night. Could there exist a worse sensation, being perceived by something that should not perceive you? Tonight, when I stared at the door, it stared back, and behind it, something was waiting. I could feel it, a weight against the wood from the other side, patient. I inserted the key, careful not to brush the actual door, and twisted left. The lock clicked. The weight behind the door seemed to settle. Disappointed. Easy enough. The process went smoothly. Ebony Gorge was big, but another ranger covered the east side and I had a four-wheeler to drive between locations. I went from door to door, locking as I went, determined to prove myself. Sometimes an hour passed between stops, miles of hiking, but there was enough time for me to notice something. There were no cricket chirps near the doors, no rustling in the underbrush. The closer you got, the less even the wind would blow, as if the air itself refused to touch them, as if the world held its breath. I took longest at the door that was only a drawing on rock. For several minutes I frowned at it before finally noticing a hole in the painted doorknob. When I inserted the key, it twisted with the satisfying chunk of a lock turning. The painted door was real. It had always been real. One more door and I would be done. I was so ready to finish that I barely saw the door itself as I approached. It was the furthest into the woods, nearly 2 miles from any service road. My nerves mingled with relief at knowing I could finally crawl under warm sheets. It wasn't until I nearly reached it that I realized what was different. It was open. That couldn't be right. Winona said they would be locked. I was so close to done. First rotation. What were the chances? Would she blame me? Run. Instead, I stood there. Not a bird flapped its wings. Not a leaf rustled. From the pitch-black opening beyond the discarded doorway came a breeze the temperature of a summer's day. Warm, heavy, wet. Then, a second later, it stopped. It came once more. The intake release of it was familiar, like something I couldn't quite name. Run, go, run now. Footsteps started, not mine. Somewhere far past the lip of the doorway, bare feet slapped on bare stone. They grew louder, more frantic, speeding up, closer, closer, nearly here. Just before the pounding reached me, I threw myself at the door and hurled it shut. Something slammed against it from the other side. A body, a hand, a face. But I was already inserting the key, twisting left, slumping to the dirt, leaning against the canyon wall, listening at the door, heart pounding, listening, listening. Something breathed on the other side. Not the running thing, something else. Something that had been there the whole time, waiting in the dark behind the runner. It breathed slow and deep, and I could feel it pressing against the wood inches from my spine. It did not run, it waited. Some minutes passed, at least 10. Finally, there was the muffled sound of the runner padding back the way he had come. But the other thing, the thing that breathed, did not leave. I felt it there, patient as stone, as I waited another half hour on the ground in the total silence of the night. It wasn't until I had hung the bone-white keys back at the station and in my bed, moments from passing out, that I finally realized what the breeze from the doorway had reminded me of. Breathing. But worse, the thing that breathed on the other side after the door closed, it hadn't been running. It had been waiting. For what? For me to open the door? For me to fall asleep? For the next quarter moon? I got what sleep I could, then reported for my shift just after noon. Before heading to the visitor center, there was a conversation I needed to have. Something happened last night, I told Winona in her office. Something you should know. I steeled myself to explain, already bracing for her reaction, but she spoke first. Whatever it was, you'd better have at least gotten sleep. Sleep? Why? For what? She blinked at me. After I told Winona what happened, being woken by something wearing her face, locking doors in the canyon walls, one of them open, she shot to her feet and swore. I'd never seen her make any reaction at all. The sight of her moving that fast was somehow worse than the words. She snatched her keys, ordered "wait here," and marched out. I waited for hours. I missed my shift at the visitor center, stomach churning in her office like a child in the principal's chair, dreading expulsion. This was it. Fired. Ebony Gorge was my last hope of escaping my past life, and what if my actions had released something that couldn't be contained? What if I'd ruined everything? When Winona finally returned, uniform crusted with something dark and boots caked in mud that smelled wrong. Too rich, too deep, like it came from somewhere light never reached. I knew what to say. I exhaled. If you need to let me go, I understand. Some part of me, raised on Disney and buddy cop shows, expected her to place a hand on my shoulder and tell me we all make mistakes. Instead, she slammed her hat on the desk. Good, that's probably happening. Right, okay. What are you still doing here? Get out. Nothing dramatic changed in the next few weeks. No sudden disappearances, no wildfires or lights in the sky, no reappearances of my fake chief in the night. The only sign something was wrong was Winona's absence. She was gone more than usual, her and a few full-timers. Where they went, nobody knew. They vanished during night hours. The rest of us seasonal rangers were left to pick up slack. Just before the next quarter moon, I offered to lock doors to help out. You've been so busy. Winona didn't respond. She only peered at me with an expression I couldn't read, like she was looking at someone already dead. "Really, anything you need," I insisted. She stared until I retreated backwards from her office, the way one retreats from something that might chase. It was coming, the final thump of the guillotine. Every day, every moment. If not today, tomorrow. If not tomorrow, the day after. For now, it just hung above me as I went about my days, checking permits, redirecting hikers, giving recommendations. The knowledge that my time at Ebony Gorge was ending violently. And then, nearly a month after the incident with the doors, Winona knocked at my tiny room. "You still want to help out?" "Anything at all." "Don't be so perky. Bootlicking doesn't make me like you more, son." Right. "What are you still doing here? Get out." "You heard about that toddler girl who went missing up north?" I searched my mind. If by up north she meant 100 miles, then yes. Ruby had been everywhere on social media all week, disappeared from her bedroom on a rural farm. Security cameras showed nothing. 1 second she was in bed, the next the nanny cam flickered and she was gone. I'd seen the footage myself. "The farmer's daughter," I offered. "That's the one. One of our SAR rangers is helping search here. She needs a partner, might be gone a few days, and you're the easiest to replace." The insult wasn't lost on me. Neither was the obvious question, why would a toddler who disappeared 100 miles away be here? But I was on the weaker end of this power dynamic, and desperate, so I simply asked, "Who am I going with?" She told me. I wished I'd refused. Here's the thing you need to understand about Lenore. If you had to choose between two rooms, one with a boa constrictor and one with Lenore, your best bet would be to choose both. Then maybe, after Lenore gutted the snake, she'd be slightly winded before she came for you. Don't misunderstand, Lenore wasn't evil, but it also wasn't fair to say she was merely intimidating. Once, when a family set up their tent in the wrong campsite, she dismantled it and handcuffed the father in front of his kids. On weekends off, she disappeared into the wilderness outside the park with only a knife, and returned with an elk. And the year before, the other rangers told me she arranged for a seasonal to be fired after he used all the hot water in their shared shower. Full-timers had pull, and she had most of all, even though she was barely older than me. From what I'd seen, she was standoffish, grumpy, and occasionally violent. She was also who I'd spend the next 3 to 7 days with, in the absolute middle of nowhere, entirely alone. The perfect situation for an accident to befall me, like, I don't know, premeditated murder. On the plus side, she wasn't too thrilled either. "Don't you dare make me slow down for this runt," she told Chief. "Harris has been insistent on pairing up recently, new safety procedure. His call, not mine." Harris was the superintendent, Winona's boss. "Besides," Winona continued, "the boy wouldn't dare complain. He's too scared of being fired." "Are you planning to?" Lenore asked. "Probably." "I'm right here," I said. "Shut up," Lenore snapped. "Right." The first day we hiked in tense silence. Lenore led, always 2 paces ahead. Or maybe I was 2 paces behind. Hard to tell. The feeling was mutual, so did it matter? We descended through redstone hoodoes to the canyon floor, past cottonwood and fir, through slot canyons, all of it in eerie silence. That first night, however, as we boiled water for dehydrated meals, I couldn't restrain myself. "Where exactly are we going?" Lenore pretended not to hear me. "Look," I said, "I'm not trying to be a suck-up or runt or whatever, but we're looking for that toddler Ruby, yeah? If I understand what we're looking for, I might help. There's gotta be some reason we think she could be here." Lenore considered. She twisted the hissing knob on her stove, killing the flame. "You've heard of the Whitechapel?" I nodded. "We're looking for that. Sometimes kids, they end up there." The second day was nearly as silent as the first. I'd gone on multi-day solo trips in Ebony before, surveying campsites, but we were further into backcountry than ever before. There was a ruggedness to it, even on low visitor days when you could hike popular trails without seeing another soul for hours. There were still tags on trees and chyrons guiding you down defined paths. Here, the only sign of humans were the broken twigs our steps left behind. The only noise was our breathing. There was a sense of wrongness to it all. I'd noticed it ever since the incident with the doors, but here, this deep, it was more pronounced. Before, hiking, I'd feel 100 eyes on me from every direction. Now, there was only one pair. Somehow, that was worse. One pair meant one thing watching, one thing that could focus, one thing that could follow. A little past noon, Lenore stopped abruptly. I narrowly avoided crashing into her and followed her gaze. In the nearby canyon wall was a light-colored spruce wood door. I didn't realize there were any so far out, I said. There shouldn't be. She stared at it longer than she should have. That one's new. New? But she just growled and continued. The latter half of the day, we navigated unofficial switchbacks to the canyon top. At the top, Lenore surveyed the rocky desert terrain, a far-off stone arch smeared against the landscape. I got the sense she'd been expecting something that wasn't there. Eventually, we descended again. The third day, I noticed a pattern. We weren't hiking randomly. Lenore knew this canyon. She'd take us to a location, look around, then immediately retrace and go somewhere new. Each stop, she radiated more frustration. The White Chapel. The other rangers said it never appeared in the same place twice. But what if that was wrong? What if there were places it appeared more often and those who'd worked here longest knew about them? When we set up camp the third night at the edge of a pond, Lenore didn't even look at me. The flame from her stove reflected in her eyes, but reflected wrong, like they were absorbing light instead of emitting. She crawled into her sleeping bag and I crawled into mine. How many more days before we gave up and turned back? We didn't have enough food. My answer came not 4 hours later. When I woke, shivering, only the moon lit the pond. The air was colder than usual, much colder. We hadn't packed for this temperature, and I inhaled sharply. On the opposite side of the pond, partly obscured by drifting wisps of mist that moved against the wind, a chapel leered down at me. Pristine white steeple, white timber frame. My inexperienced guess was post-Civil War, similar to other pioneer buildings left in Ebony Gorge. Lenore, I disentangled from my bag. You need to wake up. Lenore. She wasn't there. Her bag was fully unzipped and discarded in the dirt. Her boots sat untouched where she'd placed them. Her headlamp lay next to them, but her footprints led toward the pond, barefoot, toes digging deep like she'd been pulled. Lenore, I hissed again. But even then, groggy and disoriented, I knew where she'd be. The temperature dropped further as I trudged toward the White Chapel. Ice spiderwebbed across the pond's surface closest to it. I clutched my arms, teeth chattering, but it was no use. A single icicle hung from the eaves above main doors that had been cast open, not invitingly, but like a mouth caught mid-scream. Tall stained glass walls lined either wall, decorated with what looked like faces, except the faces were wrong. Too many eyes. Eyes that followed, leading up to a lifted dais. On that dais, a single altar. Slumped across that altar, Lenore? She didn't turn or move. I hadn't expected her to. She was barefoot. Her sleeping garments were torn, and her head lolled to one side of the stone block. A puddle of something dark gathered on the stone where she knelt. Too much of it, spreading too fast. I hesitated for one moment, considering every reason this was terrible, then shoved them down. I crossed the threshold and approached. Her eyes were open, but unseeing. Her hands were clasped awkwardly as if in prayer, though she was otherwise fully limp. She made no acknowledgement of me, as much as I nudged her. Her skin was cold. Not cold like the air, cold like something that had never been warm.